Warbeck had once been the pinnacle of luxury and elegance. However, time and neglect had weathered its grandeur, leaving behind a haunting shell that was more whispered about than visited. Mia Roberts, a budding YouTuber with a penchant for the paranormal, had stumbled upon the Warbeck Hotel while researching her next video series on real haunted places. The hotel's history was marred by numerous disappearances, unexplained phenomena, and chilling guest accounts, making it the perfect subject for her channel. Eager for a breakthrough in her career, Mia decided to stay at the hotel for a week to capture any paranormal activity. Upon arrival, the Warbeck Hotel loomed ominously against the gray sky. Its Gothic architecture, with pointed arches and towering spires, cast long, dark shadows across the overgrown courtyard. The interior was no less daunting. Grand staircases wound upwards into obscurity, and portraits of long-gone owners stared down from the walls with disconcerting intensity. Mia was greeted by the caretaker, an elderly man named Mr. Hawthorne, who had been looking after the hotel since anyone could remember. With a voice as creaky as the floorboards, he warned Mia of the hotel's rules: no wandering after midnight, always keep your room door locked, and never look into the mirror in the downstairs bathroom after sundown. Thanking Mr. Hawthorne, Mia set up her equipment in room 207, where most paranormal activities had been reported. Her setup included night vision cameras, EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, recorders, and a handheld thermal camera. As night fell, Mia began her exploration. The first few nights were relatively uneventful. However, her equipment occasionally picked up inexplicable cold spots and low whispers that seemed to have no discernible source. She reviewed the footage and audio recordings daily, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. On the fourth night, things took a sinister turn. Mia woke up to the chilling sensation of being watched. Her room was ice cold. Grabbing her thermal camera, she scanned the room. The camera's screen showed an abnormal cold figure standing at the foot of her bed. She whipped around, but there was nothing there. When she looked back at the camera, the figure had vanished. The next day, Mia interviewed Mr. Hawthorne, hoping to learn more about the hotel's eerie history. He spoke of a guest in the late 1920s, a young woman named Eliza, who had checked into room 207 and was never seen again. Her belongings remained untouched, and her room was left exactly as she had left it for decades. Intrigued and slightly horrified, Mia decided to spend her last night in Eliza's room. As she prepared her cameras and recorders, the air grew inexplicably cold, and a sense of unease settled over her. That night, as Mia lay in bed, the temperature dropped sharply. The EVP recorder started to crackle, and a soft, sorrowful voice echoed through the room, "Find me." Overwhelmed by fear but driven by her desire to uncover the truth, Mia followed the voice that led her to the mirror in her room. The reflection was not her own. Instead, it showed Eliza, looking pale and distraught, mouthing words Mia couldn't hear. As Mia leaned in closer, trying to understand, the mirror began to crack, the room shook, and the lights flickered violently. Suddenly, everything went dark. The camera's night vision mode showed Mia reaching towards the mirror, her hand trembling. And just as her fingers touched the glass, the video feed went abruptly static. As Mia's fingers grazed the cold, fractured surface of the mirror, the air around her hummed with a palpable, eerie energy. The mirror's reflection twisted, and Eliza's sorrowful eyes bore into Mia's soul. Suddenly, a violent gust of wind erupted in the room, sending papers flying and extinguishing the candles that Mia had lit for ambience. The only light now came from the flickering screen of Mia's camera, casting eerie shadows against the walls. The temperature in the room dropped further, a chilling embrace that seemed to seep into Mia's bones. The voice, now clearer, repeated, "Find me, free me." The words were almost a whisper, yet they filled the room with a desperate, sorrowful plea. Driven by a mixture of fear and determination, Mia asked aloud, "How can I free you, Eliza?" The air stilled for a moment before a soft, almost imperceptible whisper guided her, "The diary, In the library, Mia, though terrified, felt a surge of resolve. She needed to find the diary. Whatever secrets it held, it seemed crucial to understanding the hotel's hauntings and perhaps freeing Eliza's spirit. Grabbing her camera and the EVP recorder, she hurried out of the room. The hotel's corridors were dimly lit by the moonlight streaming through dusty windows, the silence punctuated only by her footsteps echoing off the walls. As she made her way to the ground floor, the portraits on the walls seemed to watch her, their eyes following her every move. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the hotel itself was aware of her intentions. Reaching the library, Mia pushed open the heavy wooden door. The room was shrouded in darkness, save for the moonlight that cast long, creeping shadows among the rows of ancient books. She felt a chill run down her spine as the scent of old paper and mildew hit her. The library seemed untouched by time, a relic of the hotel's grander days. Using her camera's light, Mia began searching the shelves for any sign of a diary. As she moved deeper into the library, she heard a soft thud behind her. Whirling around, her light fell upon a small, leather-bound book on the floor. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Cautiously, Mia picked it up. The cover was dusty, but the name Eliza was engraved in faded gold letters. Opening the diary, Mia began to read, her voice barely a whisper. The entries were dated back to the 1920s, detailing Eliza's stay at the Warbeck Hotel. As she read, a picture of Eliza's life and her mysterious disappearance began to unfold. Eliza wrote of strange occurrences, of feeling watched, and of eerie voices in the night. Her last entry was frantic, a desperate note that spoke of a terrible revelation and a warning to future readers. Suddenly, a cold hand seemed to clasp Mia's shoulder. She spun around, dropping the diary, her heart racing. But there was nothing there, only the lingering touch of something unseen. Panic set in, and Mia felt an overwhelming urge to flee. But she couldn't leave, not without helping Eliza. Gathering her courage, Mia picked up the diary and read the last few lines of Eliza's final entry. It mentioned a hidden room, a place where the truth of the Warbeck Hotel lay buried. Eliza's final words were a plea to uncover the secret, to bring to light what had been hidden in the shadows for too long. Determined to uncover the truth, Mia set out to find the hidden room. The hotel seemed to groan under the weight of its secrets as she moved through the darkened halls. Her path was unclear, but she felt an unseen force guiding her, leading her deeper into the bowels of the hotel. As Mia descended into the lower levels of the hotel, the air grew colder, and the oppressive feeling of dread increased. She could feel the eyes of the hotel's long-dead inhabitants watching her, the weight of their gazes almost physical in the oppressive darkness. Her camera's battery was low, the light flickering erratically as she came to a halt in front of an old, rusted door. It was concealed behind a draping tapestry, easy to miss unless one knew what to look for. This had to be it, the hidden room Eliza had written about. With trembling hands, Mia reached out to open the door, the metal cold and unyielding under her touch. As the door creaked open, a rush of stale air greeted her, carrying with it the faint, almost forgotten scent of lavender and something darker, metallic and sinister. Inside, the room was shrouded in shadow, a forgotten chamber untouched by the passage of decades. Mia's camera light pierced the darkness, revealing a room cluttered with old furniture covered in dust sheets, and walls lined with old, peeling wallpaper that seemed to whisper of bygone eras. The air was thick, laden with the musty smell of mold and decay. Mia stepped into the room, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that carpeted the floor. As she moved her light across the room, something caught her eye, a large, ornate mirror, much like the one in her room, but this one was draped in a heavy black cloth. A shiver ran down her spine as she remembered Mr. Hawthorne's warning about mirrors after sundown. But the sun had long set, and the need to uncover the truth urged her forward. With a deep breath, she reached out and pulled the cloth from the mirror. The glass was clouded with age, but as Mia stared into it, her reflection began to distort, her features twisting into a visage of horror that was not her own. She stumbled back, her heart pounding, as the air around her grew oppressively cold. Suddenly, the room filled with the sound of a heartbeat, slow and deliberate, echoing through the silent hotel. Mia's own heart raced in response, her breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. The EVP recorder crackled to life, a voice whispering from the static, "Closer, closer, find the truth." Compelled by an unseen force, Mia approached an old wooden desk in the corner of the room. The drawers were locked, but lying atop the desk was an old, yellowed photograph of a woman, Eliza. Her expression was somber, her eyes seeming to follow Mia as she moved. Next to the photograph was a small, rusty key. Mia picked up the key, the metal cold against her skin. It seemed to vibrate with an energy of its own, as if eager to unlock secrets long buried. She tried the key in the desk drawers. The first few didn't budge, but the last drawer opened with a creak that echoed ominously through the room. Inside, there were several old documents and another diary, far older than the one belonging to Eliza. As she flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper fell out. It was a letter, written in a hurried scrawl. The ink was faded, but the words were still legible. It was dated several years before Eliza's stay, written by a previous guest of the hotel. The letter spoke of dark rituals and hidden passages, of sacrifices made in the dead of night to appease something ancient and malevolent that resided within the hotel's walls. Mia's hands trembled as she read, the implications horrifying. The letter ended abruptly, the last words smeared as if the writer had been interrupted. "They are coming. They must not find me here." The truth must be, the rest was indecipherable, lost to time and fear. The heartbeat sound grew louder, more insistent. Mia felt a gust of wind as though the room itself were breathing. The temperature plummeted, her breath visible in the icy air. She turned back to the mirror, and in the reflection, she no longer saw herself but a multitude of faces, all distorted with pain and fear. They were the lost souls of the hotel, trapped within its walls. Among the faces, Eliza's stood out, her expression one of deep sorrow and pleading. Mia reached out to the mirror, her fingers nearly touching the cold glass, when suddenly the room shook violently. Books fell from the shelves, the light from her camera flickered wildly, and a deep, dark laugh echoed around her, filling the space with dread. The mirror cracked, the spiderweb lines obscuring the tortured faces as they seemed to scream silently. Mia stepped back, her mind racing. She needed to understand how to free these souls, how to put an end to the darkness that held the Warbeck Hotel in its grip. But as she turned to leave, the door through which she had entered slammed shut with a force that shook the room. The laughter grew louder, surrounding her, a sound with no discernible source but everywhere at once. Mia was trapped, the key to the mystery within her grasp, but the danger far from over. She turned back to the broken mirror, determined to confront whatever horror awaited. The shadows in the corners of the room grew darker, and the temperature dropped even further, a supernatural chill that threatened to freeze the very marrow in her bones. Mia steadied her camera, the record light blinking red in the gloom, her voice steady as she spoke into the darkness, "I am not leaving until I find the truth." The room fell silent, waiting, watching, as Mia prepared to delve deeper into the secrets of the Warbeck Hotel, her every move watched by unseen eyes. The story of the hotel was far from over, and Mia was now a part of its haunted legacy. Mia's resolve hardened as she faced the broken mirror, its jagged shards reflecting her distorted, determined image. Behind her, the laughter had ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. The cold was now almost unbearable, seeping into her bones, but Mia's focus was unyielding. She turned her attention back to the documents she had found, desperate for any clue that might help her unravel the dark mysteries of the Warbeck Hotel. Amid the papers, Mia discovered an old map of the hotel, its edges brittle and yellowed with age. The map detailed not just the guest rooms and public areas, but also marked several hidden passages and rooms that were not part of the official blueprints. One passage, in particular, caught Mia's eye. It seemed to lead from the library, where she currently was, to what the map labeled as the ritual chamber. With the map in hand, Mia scanned the library for any sign of a hidden door. The bookshelves were extensive, filled with old, leather-bound books that smelled of mildew and decay. She pushed against the shelves, feeling for any movement. Finally, one of the shelves gave way slightly, revealing a mechanism hidden behind the spines of the books. Mia pressed it, and with a low groan, the shelf swung open, revealing a narrow, dark passage. Switching on her camera's light once more, Mia stepped into the passage. The air was cooler here, if that was possible, and carried a faint, unidentifiable odor that made Mia's stomach churn. The passage was lined with stone and sloped downward, leading her deep beneath the hotel. As she walked, the silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat, a stark contrast to the earlier cacophony. The passage ended at an ornate door, carved with symbols that Mia didn't recognize but felt intuitively were of a dark and malevolent nature. She hesitated, her hand poised on the cold metal doorknob. The fear was palpable, a living thing that seemed to pulse in the air around her. But Mia's desire to uncover the truth, to help the trapped souls and perhaps save herself, pushed her forward. She opened the door. The room beyond was vast, much larger than she expected. The walls were lined with more symbols, some painted, some carved deeply into the stone. In the center of the room stood an altar, and though it was clear no one had used this room for many decades, the altar was disturbingly well preserved. Candles, their wax long since hardened and discolored, flanked an old book that lay open. Mia approached, her steps echoing ominously in the chamber. The book was written in a language she didn't understand, filled with more of the strange symbols from the walls. However, the drawings that accompanied the text were clear enough. They depicted rituals, some seemingly benign, others unmistakably sinister, involving figures that did not look quite human. A sudden noise, a whisper, almost too faint to hear, caused Mia to whirl around. The room remained empty, though the feeling of being watched intensified. Swallowing her fear, Mia turned back to the altar, determined to find something, anything, that could help her make sense of what was happening. That's when she noticed that the floor around the altar was slightly raised. Curious, she knelt down and felt along the edges, finding a small gap. With effort, she lifted the false floor, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside was another book, much older and bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. Mia hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to leave it untouched, but the cries of the tormented souls echoed in her mind, driving her forward. She opened the book to the first page, and the air around her grew oppressively heavy, the darkness seeming to close in. The words on the page began to glow faintly with an unnatural light, illuminating the room with a ghastly pallor. The text was a diary, and the first entry was dated over a century ago. It told the story of the hotel's construction and the discovery of an ancient burial ground beneath the site. The entries detailed how the hotel's founder, driven by greed and a morbid fascination with the occult, had used the burial ground's dark energies to curse the hotel, binding the spirits of the dead to him for eternal servitude. As Mia read, the voices of the hotel's lost souls whispered around her, their words a mosaic of sadness and rage. She realized that she was not just in a hotel, she was in a prison of spirits, trapped by a century-old curse. Determined to free them and herself, Mia read on, searching for any mention of how to break the curse. The diary spoke of a final ritual, one that could either seal the curse forever or shatter it, but the details were maddeningly vague. Suddenly, the ground beneath Mia began to tremble, a low rumble that grew into a roar as the walls of the ritual chamber shuddered with the force of an unseen storm. Dust and small pebbles rained down from the ceiling, and the candles around the room flickered wildly as if caught in an unfelt wind. The air turned icy cold, and Mia's breath clouded in front of her face. The whispers of the trapped souls grew louder, a cacophony of desperate, anguished pleas. As Mia clutched the ancient diary to her chest, the pages fluttered as if caught in a breeze, stopping on a page marked heavily with dark, ominous symbols. Her eyes scanned the text, which spoke of a blood moon night, a rare celestial event that occurred once every century. It was on such a night, the diary revealed, that the curse had been cast, and it was only on such a night that it could be undone. Mia's heart sank as she realized the gravity of her situation. The blood moon was tonight, as she remembered seeing the crimson hue of the moon through the hotel's dusty windows earlier that evening. The alignment of such a night with her stay couldn't be a mere coincidence. It felt orchestrated, as if the hotel itself had summoned her here to witness or perhaps to partake in something unimaginable. She read on, discovering that the ritual required the presence of a bearer, a living soul who willingly offered themselves to stand in the threshold between the living and the dead. This person would need to recite a chant, written in the diary, at the peak of the blood moon. However, the text warned that if the ritual were performed incorrectly, the consequences would be dire, not only cementing the curse but strengthening it, potentially unleashing the bound spirit's wrath upon the world. The sound of the door to the ritual chamber slamming shut snapped Mia back to the present. Her heart raced as she looked up to see shadows moving along the walls, shapes that were human-like but twisted and contorted. The whispers grew into moans, and the cold pressed in around her like a physical force. Gathering her courage, Mia stood up, clutching the diary. She approached the altar, her every step echoed in the chamber. The air around her seemed to thrum with energy as the moon's red light began to seep into the room through small, dirt-caked windows high up on the walls. The symbols on the floor around the altar glowed faintly red, reflecting the moon's light. Mia placed the diary on the altar, her fingers trembling as she opened it to the page detailing the chant. She took a deep breath, her mind racing with doubts and fears. Was she truly prepared to risk everything to potentially save these tortured souls? Could she bear the immense responsibility of breaking a century-old curse? As she contemplated her next move, the room seemed to close in around her. The shadows on the walls danced more frenetically, as if excited by the prospect of what was to come. The temperature dropped further, and Mia could see her breath puff out in frantic clouds. The moans of the spirits grew louder, more urgent. Mia turned to face the mirror again, the broken glass reflecting her image back in a fractured, disjointed mosaic. She could see the fear in her own eyes, but also resolve. She had come too far to back down now. With the diary's chant in front of her, she began to read aloud, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. As she spoke the ancient words, the air in the room shifted, the wind howling through the chamber like the cries of 1,000 lost souls. The ground shook, and the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The spirits' moans turned into screams, a terrifying orchestra that filled the space with dread. Mia continued, her voice growing louder over the tumult. The symbols on the floor blazed brightly, casting eerie shadows that twisted and writhed on the walls. The energy in the room peaked as the blood moon reached its zenith, bathing everything in a deep, sinister red. Just as Mia was about to recite the final line of the chant, a deafening crash echoed through the chamber. She whirled around to see the door had flown open, revealing the figure of Mr. Hawthorne, his eyes wide with terror. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm of spiritual energy. "You don't understand what you're..." But before he could finish, a powerful force swept through the room, cutting him off and throwing Mia against the altar. The diary flew from her hands, landing open on the ground, its pages fluttering wildly as if caught in a hurricane. Lying on the floor, Mia felt the energy surge around her, the spirit's screams reaching a fever pitch. The ritual was almost complete, but now it hung in the balance, its outcome uncertain. As she struggled to regain her footing, the entire room seemed to pulse with an overwhelming power. The symbols on the floor now blazed with an intense light, casting grotesque shadows against the crumbling walls. The air was thick with the cries of the spirits, their voices mingling in a cacophonous symphony of pain and anger. Above the chaos, the blood moon cast a sinister glow through the windows, its light seeming to fuel the ritual's terrifying climax. Mia crawled toward the diary, her hands shaking as she reached out to grasp it. The room spun around her, the force of the ritual pulling at her very soul. She could feel the boundaries between the living and the dead thinning, a thin veil that threatened to tear at any moment. As she clutched the diary, her fingers found the last page of the chant. With a desperate strength, she pulled herself up, leaning against the altar for support. With the room trembling around her, Mia read the final words of the chant aloud. The moment the last syllable left her lips, an unearthly silence fell over the chamber. The howling wind ceased, the candles flickered out, and the glowing symbols dimmed to a faint shimmer. The oppressive presence of the spirits paused as if holding its breath, and the air filled with a palpable tension. Mia stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, waiting for a sign of what she had unleashed. The mirror, cracked and ominous, suddenly cleared, reflecting nothing but an empty room behind her. She turned slowly, her heart pounding, expecting to face some horrific manifestation of the curse she had dared to confront. But the room was empty. The shadows retreated, clinging to the corners like specters of a nightmare fading at dawn. The sense of overwhelming dread lifted, leaving a heavy stillness in its wake. Confused but relieved, Mia stepped toward the door, her movements hesitant. As she passed the mirror, she glanced at it once more. This time, her own reflection stared back, unaltered but for the pale visage of fatigue and fear. Mia exited the ritual chamber, her steps echoing in the empty corridors of the Warbeck Hotel. The hotel itself seemed to have exhaled a long-held breath, the atmosphere lighter, though still heavy with the echoes of its dark past. She made her way back to the library, the path now familiar and less foreboding. As she reached the main hall, Mr. Hawthorne appeared from the shadows, his expression a mix of awe and fear. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice trembling. I think so," Mia replied, unsure of the consequences of her actions. "The spirits, the voices, they're gone." Mr. Hawthorne nodded, looking around as if seeing the hotel for the first time. "You've done something no one else has dared to," he said softly. "But remember, some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed." Mia pondered his words, a chill running down her spine. She had set out to uncover the truth, to document her findings for her audience. But in doing so, she had become part of the hotel's haunting legacy. As she gathered her equipment, preparing to leave, she felt the weight of Mr. Hawthorne's warning. The Warbeck Hotel stood silent as Mia walked out into the early morning light. The curse might have been broken, or perhaps it had merely changed, transformed by her actions into something new, something unknown. As she drove away, the hotel shrank in her rearview mirror, but the sense of unease remained. Mia knew her experience at the Warbeck Hotel was far from over. The footage she had captured, the events she had witnessed, and the shadows that still lingered in her mind were just the beginning. The true horror might not have been the spirits or the curse, but the realization that some mysteries are better left unexplored. As the road stretched out before her, Mia felt the pull of the hotel, a gnawing sense that she would return. The story was incomplete, its chapters written in the whispers of the dead and the silence of the unseen. And somewhere, in the depths of the Warbeck Hotel, the shadows waited, patient and eternal, for her return.